to our final week of pre-work. That's right, session 6 will be at our next interactive session, and that will end this portion of the training. So we have a lot to do, and I will warn you that normally you just have to go through this JOT form and complete all these tasks and videos and readings and things like that as you go through. There will be maybe 2 additional things that you will have to do other than this JOT form, but we will talk about that more later at the end. So let's go ahead and get started since we've got a lot to do this week. All right, first we want to start off by talking about expectations. All right, I know this sounds like a really funky thing or weird thing to talk about. However, sometimes we as the CASA staff or you as the CASA volunteer advocate, we think we understand what the expectations of everybody are, but we would prefer to be Captain Obvious, like this wonderful little cartoon that I love, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. At this point, you would have read through all of the policies and procedures for the program and the job description, etc. So you should have a really clear understanding of what our expectations are. However, just to kind of really some of the basics of it, we expect you to submit a monthly report to the program on time every month. Now, monthly reports are due by the 5th of the following month. We're going to talk more specifically about monthly reports later on in this session. However, I always want to make sure that we put the due date on there. So January's monthly report that covers the entire month of January would be due by February 5th. This is true. You do have to submit a monthly report even if you do not have a case. That is a very crucial piece of information. Number 2, submit a court report, but not just a court report, which is why I hesitated right there. An updated court report with some new information every hearing, 10 business days before the hearing. This is not necessarily news. This is absolutely crucial. So I understand sometimes not much is going on in the case. Like the case, they may not be a lot of information or a great many things that have happened since the last hearing. That's okay. I need you to still update the report with anything that is new. You know, the child might have started soccer at one point, and then you could talk about, hey, their soccer team's been doing pretty well because they might still be in soccer. So we really want to make sure some pieces of information are new. Another opportunity, mom still hasn't, or mom has been able to complete this. Dad was able to complete this, or dad was not able to complete this. So again, we're going to get into court reports and monthly reports a little bit more later on. Next, you must complete at least 12 hours of what is called in-service or continuing education every year. Now, our program does this on a calendar year. We try and make it simple. I always say that, you know, in January, February, and March, the weather's not always the greatest in Kansas, and so this is an excellent opportunity to go ahead and knock out your 12 hours. Continuing education can be up to 4 hours of it can be books that you have read. It can also be some videos, but we also offer online courses and online trainings, and we submit via email many opportunities for those trainings every year. So it's not hard to find. You don't have to pay for any. We also have a complete lending library here in our Geary office that we can get to whatever county and get to you, where you can borrow some things for free. We also have a list of potential YouTubes where you may need to kind of just write a quick paragraph summarizing what you learned so that we can provide proof to National CASA, Kansas CASA, and OJA that you actually completed and watched and things like that. There are great variety of those. You always want to reach out to our outreach coordinator so that you can make sure if something is or is not allowed. All right. The next thing is the Code of Ethics. Now, you would have signed the Code of Ethics for the program at this point. We actually, in our program, ask people to do that before they even start training. But we have the expectation that you're going to follow that Code of Ethics, that you are going to follow it to the letter. It is very, very important to us. Our expectations are also that you're going to stay in regular contact or regular communication with the executive director or CASA staff. If you have another staff member that is supervising you, then you will stay in contact with them on a regular basis. Now, what I will tell you is we all lead busy lives, and that does not mean you have to call us every time something happens. What it does mean is if you're sending in your monthly reports that give us an update every month on the case, you're staying in communication if we send out an email that requires a response, you're responding, you're submitting your court reports on time. These are the things that are part of that regular communication. You don't have to necessarily additional. Now, obviously, if you ever have any questions, or if you have concerns, or you're not sure how you want to sit down and go over some possibilities for your court report, absolutely, please include that. That is absolutely not a problem. That would also be considered. We just don't want you to think that you have to send us an update every week or anything like that, but just regular communication so that we know if we reach out to you, you're going to return that email or phone call or whatever it is. All right, and then the next one is that you will read and obey and agree to follow all the volunteer policies and procedures. Now, this is again something that you agree to do when you sign up. You are given that volunteer policies and procedures right at the beginning to read through before you even are considered into training. And then when we do your background check, obviously that you signed that you had read it and you had agreed to follow and obey it. That is actually very important. It is one of the things that the Office of Judicial Administration, OJA, requires of us every year to show that you have signed off on that when you first came in and that you're following it and things like that. So I've kind of gone through, those are our major expectations. Those are not all the expectations, for following Supreme Court Rule 110, meeting with your child in person at least once a month. Those are additional expectations, but I think we've already been pretty clear about those. Now, this is not just a one-sided expectation. We expect this out of you. We also have the understanding that you have expectations of us as CASA staff, and that you have the expectation that all staff will respond to questions and concerns in a reasonable period of time. Now, I will tell you that, our staff are in and out of the office. We are not always here on a regular basis because we might be traveling from one county to another, or sometimes we'll take a day off or a sick day or something like that. But you should have the expectation that we will get back to you quickly and within a reasonable period of time. In addition, staff support, that we are going to support you, that we are going to be there for you if you have a question, if you have a concern, if you want to talk over your case. So we always have a plan of what we're going to do that day when we come in the mornings. And then we understand that if a volunteer has an issue or needs something, that whatever you need then becomes our priority. And that should be your expectation of us, because our admin stuff should come secondary to what you're doing, because you are actually doing the work of the organization. You should have the expectation that we will give you annual feedback, and you have the opportunity in our program to give us feedback on what's going well and what's going poorly twice a year. Both times are anonymous, and we don't know who responds and who doesn't respond. We always ask for everybody to respond, but that's really helpful to us because we don't always know what's going well or what's going poorly, and you may have an idea, hey, what if we did it like this? Now, we might not be able to. Sometimes we're forced to do things a certain way because of Office of Judicial Administration or National CASA or Kansas CASA Association. However, we're perfectly fine sharing that's why we don't do something. But if you can make a suggestion, we're happy to tweak what we do or change what we do if it's going to benefit everybody and if that makes it easier. One of the examples is the monthly reports that I was just talking about. Again, we'll talk more about those later. But we had some volunteers that suggested, hey, rather than just sending it out and having it as a Word document that we complete and send back in every month, could you make it an online form? So we were like, absolutely. So we figured out a way to do that. And then there was an issue with the very first one we sent out, and they couldn't save their information because we want you to be able to enter it in as you go. And then we fixed that problem. But that came from a volunteer asking if we could do it. And now we have probably about half of our volunteers, maybe even just over half at this point, who actually use the online form as opposed to the emailing us the Word document. Either way it works for us. We know some people don't like change and some people prefer to do it a certain way. It's easier for them, and that's fine. But that is an example of feedback that we received from our volunteers and how we made changes because of it. Okay. The next one is that you should have the expectation and anticipation that our staff is also going to follow those same rules of ethics and code of ethics that we ask you to sign and follow. We are also held to that exact same standard, if not a higher standard. That we're going to support your safety concerns. You know, I've talked about interviews and potentially private conversations in public spaces if you have safety concerns with a parent or a situation and things like that. And we've always talked a great deal about safety. If you have a concern, even if you're not necessarily able to articulate it in the moment, you should anticipate and expect us to take it seriously, and we do. Now, what I am not going to do today, yay, I know you'll be saying yay in a second, is go through our entire volunteer advocate policy and procedure handbook, our policies and procedures with you. That is something that we've already sent you. Our expectation is that you've already read it, and because you agreed to it before you started training. And so I would also let you know that that is our most updated one that you see listed here. We do periodically have to go through and update certain things as statutes or laws change, or national CASA requirements or Kansas CASA requirements change. And so when we do that, we always have to update it. And typically what I'll do is I'll send out an email with 2 documents. One will be the current volunteer policies and procedures. And then it will have a bunch of red lines in it or red printing and different things like that, so you can very clearly see what has changed. And then we'll send a clean copy that shows all just the new policy and procedure updated in a clean document. We do that so it's really easy for us to track what has changed and what the changes are and are not, and that way you only need to necessarily focus in on what is changing or has changed. However, when we do update that, when we email that out, there'll be a link in that email, and I don't anticipate updating them anytime soon, so nobody panic. But what we will do is we'll have a link in there where you will go online and you will say, I have read and received typically you'll have to put your name in it. It'll have a paragraph stating, I have received and read and agree to follow the updated policy and procedure for the volunteers that was submitted on, and whatever the date is. And then there'll be a place for you to electronically sign that like you did your application, and that sends a copy to you and a copy to us. We have to put that in your volunteer file because the Office of Judicial Administration audits your volunteer files every year to make sure that you have done all of these things. So that's what happens. All right, but I'm not going to go through all the pages of that, but I am going to bring out some of the do's and don'ts. I feel like it's really important for us to go ahead and talk about CASA Volunteer Advocate, CVA, CASA Volunteer Advocate do's and don'ts. First of all, you need to maintain a complete written records about the case, including appointments, interviews, information gathered about the child or children. Remember those notes every time you met with someone that we talked about, and I said, hey, put who's there, put the date, you can put the time if you want, and then you have your questions and all the answers, and then you put your impressions and everything on it. So we've talked about this. That is what we're talking about. That is a part of that official case file. And although you maintain it, because it will help you do the court notes, which we're going to talk about soon, it's really, really important that you keep that, because that is officially part of the case file. You would report any incidents of new or unknown child, well, that is just silly. Abuse, that should say abuse, and I will get that fixed, or neglect to DCF through that mandated reporting and to the CASA staff. We've talked about that way back in, I want to say, the first or the second week. That you will interview the parties involved in the case. So this would be the child, this would be the parents, this would be placement potentially, and anybody else that you would need to talk to throughout the case. This also includes visiting the child at least once a month in person. Now, typically our standard is every other week, or at least 2 to 3 times a month. Sometimes the first one happens in person, second one might be a phone call or any combination, but that you're staying in contact with the child at least every other week. All right, and has been fixed. If you look now, it says child abuse or neglect. Just have to always do that sort of stuff. So that's one of the things, is we want to make sure that you're visiting and you're staying on top of, especially the child, to make sure of lots of things. So that's how you monitor the case. You participate in any planning or treatment team meetings. There might be best interest staffings, there might be the permanency hearings, different things like that. Obviously, as you are able, if they have it scheduled at a time that you can't be there, then our expectation would become you need to let the staff know, and we can attend and take notes on your behalf and share with the team anything that you wanted to bring to the table for discussion. That you will complete and submit a monthly report on time each month. It is due on the 5th of the month. So May's would be due June 5th. June's would be due July 5th. So it's due the 5th of the month after. Our monthly reports, again, only handle what happens in that once month. We will talk about that more later. And then complete and submit an updated court report 10 business days before each court hearing. We talked about that already in our expectations. And complete 12 hours of continuing education, sometimes called in-service, each year. Again, that was in the expectations. And then here's one that is in our policies and procedures that we need to point out as well. You will return all case file return the case file and any and all materials related to the case to the CASA office within 10 days of the case closing, or if discharging of the case. So we have a lot of military around here, and if someone comes down on orders to transfer someplace else, they may have to leave a case. At that point in time, you would have to be discharged from the case, and so at that point you have 10 days to get that to us. There are occasions where people have not kept any paper files. They have kept everything electronically. Then you just have to email it to us, and then you'd have to destroy anything that you kept electronically. Want to make sure that that's clear as well. And then in the CASA Volunteer Advocate dues, obviously follows Kansas Supreme Court Rule 110, which I'll talk about in just a minute or two. All right, so we have some don'ts. There's not as many don'ts. There's more do's than don'ts in this one. Do not share any case information with someone that is not permitted to have it. Now, so this can include your spouse and your family. They should not know any details of the case. I have personally taken cases several times myself, and my husband knows I have a case. He will typically know if it's a girl or a boy, just because when I like to personally give a small birthday or a small holiday gift. And if I'm getting, a sticker book, then obviously it's a boy sticker book or a girl sticker book. So he can deduce that it's a girl or a boy, but that's it. He doesn't know where the child is. When I go on my visits, he does not know where even the city where the child is. He doesn't know the address. He doesn't know anything about the case. He might know that I have a court hearing, although being on staff, my husband probably wouldn't, but at a point in time where being just a straight volunteer advocate as opposed to staff, they may know, because you may make plans to go to court that day. And if that's the case, that's perfectly fine that they know that you have a court hearing. But even then, we're trying to keep as much information because they're not permitted to have it, which does mean that your spouse cannot travel with you and drop you off at a visitation. So sometimes my children have been placed out of town. For instance, I live in Junction City. Well, I live in the county of Geary County, which encompasses Junction City. I don't live in the downtown city area. And at one point in time, I had a child that was placed very close by in Manhattan. So I would just tell my husband, I'm going to go visit my child. Be back in a few hours. No problem. He didn't know I was driving all the way to Manhattan to visit with the child. Okay. I had a child that was at one point in time on a different case that was placed out, I want to say it was like 2.5 to 3 hours away. It was slightly west of Wichita in a small town out there. And I had arranged that particular visit while I was at a mandatory training in Wichita. That was an overnight training. It was one of my director's trainings. I thought, hey, I'm only an hour away since I'm in Wichita. Great. So what I had to do is leave my husband. My husband happened to also have something to do in Wichita, so we were both there at the same time. And then I had to leave him at a Bass Pro Shop, which was kind of dangerous, and leave Wichita, drive an hour out, visit my child, and come back because he couldn't even know the name. I don't even want him to know the name. So you'll have to take some precautions. It's not like he could just drop me off. If for some reason, there was one time that my husband also had to go to Manhattan when I was visiting the child that was in Manhattan. So I literally dropped him off where he needed to be in Manhattan, took the car, went, did the visit, and then came and picked him up. So again, he knew I was going someplace. He didn't know if it was Manhattan or I was coming back to JC. So you see how we put that he didn't have access to anything that would potentially breach confidentiality. Continue with the case where there is a conflict of interest. So this is where we're going to definitely not have very many issues, but we do occasionally have them. For instance, we may have someone either in the military who's active duty or who works on Fort Riley or who is a spouse of an active duty soldier on Fort Riley. And so that family might be in the active duty spouses or the active duty soldiers unit. But you didn't necessarily realize that when we assigned the case. Now you realize there might be a conflict of interest because you know them and you didn't realize you knew them before. So that's where you shouldn't continue the case just because you started it once you realize there's a conflict of interest. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, so I don't want to get into it too much right here. So you can't be on a case if there is any kind of conflict of interest. There are other occasions where this may happen. Again, we'll talk more about that. The next one is you cannot be the CASA volunteer advocate and educational advocate for a child or for the same child. And we talked about this previously, and I want to say it was last week, and that is because there is a potential for a conflict of interest. So we never want that kind of conflict of interest. You cannot provide transportation of any kind. You cannot provide any kind of transportation for the child, even if the child is 18, if they're still in the system, if there's still a child in need of care and the case hasn't closed yet. We cannot provide transportation of any kind. Now, other programs across the state of Kansas do. Our program, our board of directors voted against it because it's a huge financial burden for our program to do that, because we then have to take out insurance as well as you having insurance, and there are a lot of other things that have to happen. And it's becoming more and more restrictive, and our board said, nope, this is too much. We're not that big of a program where we can absorb that cost. So understand that there are programs in Kansas. If you know someone else or if you're with another program and they provide transportation, you will find out about that when you when you're interacting with that other program. However, that does not mean that we allow it. So be very careful. Our program, if you're a volunteer with our program, we do not provide any kind of transportation. We also have a limit of $50 per year. Like I said earlier, I typically like to get each child that I'm the volunteer for a little something at their birthday and a little something around the holiday season. There is a cap of $50 on that. Now, I do also want to say that it is not your responsibility to provide like regular clothing and different things like that. That's what St. Francis does. That is what DCF is supposed to provide. But these are just small little gifts. Again, you can go to dollar stores or you can find sales and end up getting them. The biggest thing is there are restrictions within the Office of Judicial Administration that put that on us as well. And so our program has set it to $50 per year. The other thing that I would say is gifts. You cannot give your child money. That is absolutely precluded. You can't give them a $20 bill or anything like that. You can give gifts, but it can't total more than $50 per year. Okay. You cannot provide any sort of supervision for any visits. So visits between siblings, visits between parents and the child, anything like that. You cannot provide any kind of supervision. That is absolutely prohibited by the Office of the Judicial Administration. You cannot provide any direct services to the parties. So again, we go back to conflict of interest. If they come in and you work someplace that's providing a service for that family, then you might have to step away. You should at least let us know. We have to determine if it's a conflict of interest or not. If it's a conflict of interest, we're going to have to remove you from the case and we can put you on a different case. But you cannot provide any direct services. So that would be like kind of the supervision or the transportation or different things like that. In that line, you cannot give should have put this one earlier. Okay, let me skip on ahead a little bit. You cannot make placement arrangements. That would be another direct service that you can do. Now let me go back. You cannot give any legal advice to the parents, the child, to placement or anything. The only thing that you can do that would even come close to being construed as legal advice is to have that party speak to their attorney about whatever the issue is. That is your answer. That is your sole legal advice. That is all you can really suggest for them to do from a legal standpoint. And if it's something like has to do with their case plan, then you could suggest that they talk to their social worker or their caseworker or their attorney if they're having trouble getting in touch with the social worker for whatever reason. Going back to transportation and different things like that and confidentiality, you cannot take your children with you to a visit or an interview. So if you have even a newborn or an infant or small children, even if they're too young to know that they're there, you cannot take your children with you to any kind of visit with the child or a child. That is, again, a breach of confidentiality, and that is not allowed under OJA rules, Office of Judicial Administration. All right. The last thing is anything that would potentially be a breach of confidentiality. Confidentiality is absolutely essential. It is one of those things that we always, always, always want to stay on top of. Now, in that, let's talk a little bit about Kansas Supreme Court Rule 110. That affects us greatly because it is a list of what we can do and some of a little bit of what we can't do. So I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to ask you to read the documents that I've provided below and answer any questions that I have down there before you proceed further.